Chair is authorized to declare a recess of the committee at any time. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes for an opening statement. So one of the most amazing things about serving in Congress is the access members have to expertise on every issue imaginable. The range and complexity of issues that members encounter on a daily basis can be totally overwhelming, and schedules leave little, if any, time for doing independent research. So the ability to call on subject matter experts for nonpartisan analysis on issues before Congress and in the districts back home undoubtedly helps members do their jobs better. Expertise also helps Congress do its job better. This committee has done a lot of work focused on strengthening Congress's Article I capacities, and ensuring that Congress is well staffed with expertise is an important part of that. The legislative branch's informational and analytical capabilities need to be on par with those of the executive branch if Congress is to fulfill its obligations as a co-equal branch of government. The legislative support agencies make Congress and its members smarter. Armed with budget scores, policy analyses, legal assessments, and accountability measures, members are better equipped to make informed decisions on behalf of the American people. So today's hearing is about showcasing the terrific work that GAO, CRS, and CBO are doing and highlighting the innovative steps they're taking to update their products and services. This committee recognizes the tremendous value these agencies provide to Congress, and we're looking forward to supporting their work in any way we can. Today's hearing will also consider how Congress's support agencies can adapt to best meet the needs of an institution that's constantly evolving. Easy and quick accessibility to information is key for members and staff who spend much of their days on the go. If a question comes up in the middle of a hearing, staff should be able to instantly find an answer using their phones. Expertise that meets members and staff where they are is also important. A junior staffer in a personal office probably has different informational needs than senior committee staffers. And while some members want verbal briefings, others prefer dense reports. Tailoring information to the end user's needs facilitates learning and ultimately helps members and staff better serve the American people. The expertise that's available to Congress is truly remarkable. It's also somewhat of a mystery to many who work on the Hill. I'm hoping we can also discuss how the agencies can ensure that members and staff know about the incredible array of resources available to them. The committee will once again make use of the committee rules we adopted earlier this year that give us the flexibility to experiment with how we structure our hearings. Our goal is to encourage thoughtful discussion and the civil exchange of ideas and opinions. So here's the wonky part, therefore. In accordance with Clause 2J of House Rule 11, we will allow up to 30 minutes of extended questioning per witness, and without objection, time will not be strictly segregated between the witnesses, which will allow for extended back and forth exchanges between members and the witnesses. Vice Chair Timmons and I will manage the time to ensure that every member has equal opportunity to participate. Any member who wishes to speak should signal their request to me or Vice Chair Timmons. Additionally, members who wish to claim their individual 5 minutes to question each witness pursuant to Clause 2J2 of Rule 11 will be permitted to do so following the period of extended questioning. I feel like I really nailed that, you guys. All right, I'd like to now invite Vice Chair Timmons to share some opening remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning. Great to be with you. Sorry for the schedule change. We appreciate y'all accommodating it. And really, I just want to say thank you so much for coming yourselves. It means a lot. And we are here to discuss what additional tools and resources y'all need to do your jobs better. And we've been trying to fix the same problems for decades. Immigration comes to the front of mind, debt, healthcare. We're not really getting very far. And we got to change the way we're doing things in Congress. And so the purpose of this committee is how to make Congress more effective, efficient, and transparent for the American people. That's the tagline. But really, it's how do we solve these big challenges that we're facing? And honestly, your role in how to make Congress do its job better could not be more important. The resources that y'all provide really make a big difference. And the question is, what can we do to help members of Congress and to help your various groups, support agencies, make us better at our job? And so really, we appreciate you taking the time. Our hope is to figure out what we can do to help you do your jobs better so Congress can do its job better. So again, just thank you so much for taking the time to come yourselves, and we look forward to learning more. And be prepared. This is not a normal hearing. We will all ask questions and we will go back and forth, and it is really more of a roundtable setting. So it should be fun. And again, thank you for being here.
Terrific. We have two panels today. I'm honored to welcome our first panelists who are here to share with us their efforts their agencies are taking to continue providing top-notch support to Congress. Witnesses are reminded that your written statements will be made part of the record. Our first witness is Gene Dodaro, the Comptroller General of the United States and the head of the Government Accountability Office. He has served in that role since December of 2010. Previously, he served as Acting Comptroller General and as the Chief Operating Officer of the GAO. Mr. Dodaro, you are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Congressman Timmons, good to see you both this morning. I appreciate the opportunity to talk about GAO's service to the Congress. GAO's evolved over the past century. This year we celebrate the 100th anniversary of the GAO to provide a wide range of services to the Congress. For example, we deploy multidisciplinary teams of subject area and technical experts to look at hundreds of federal programs and activities every year. Now, these audits result in tens of billions of dollars in financial benefits to the government, as well as over 1,000 improvements to government operations, public safety, improvement of services to the American people. Secondly, we've developed the capabilities evolved over time in order to monitor real-time what's happening, particularly in national emergencies. For example, in the coronavirus issues now, we've been giving monthly briefings to the Congress since the March 2020 CARES Act. We've been reporting bi-monthly. We've issued over 100 reports to the Congress, made over 200 recommendations to improve the federal response to the coronavirus issue, as well as increase the transparency and accountability of the $4.8 trillion that Congress has appropriated for those funds. We've also greatly expanded our capabilities in the science and technology area. We're doing many more reviews of technology assessments, artificial intelligence, quantum computing, 5G. We have many underway. We've increased the short-term and medium-term products to the Congress in the technology area based upon a need that was demonstrated recently, and also to provide more technical assistance to the Congress. We're on track to enhance our operations in the science and technology area with a plan that we were asked to provide to Congress in 2019. So we'll more than double the size of that group by the end of this fiscal year. And I've asked for additional resources from the Congress. This is a top priority for me, and I believe we need to be able to provide this for the Congress as well. We've also developed the capability to identify overlap, duplication, and fragmentation in the federal government. Our work there has resulted in the last decade of 1,200 recommendations, and Congress has acted either fully or partially in the administration on over 70% of those, and it's already resulted in $500 billion in financial benefits to the government. And of course, we provide our traditional financial management operations as well. We audit the financial statements of the government. We give advice to the Congress on the fiscal trajectory issues, the debt issues, and other factors. And then we also act as guardians of the role of the Congress to control the power of the purse. We issue legal opinions on the empowerment issues, on anti-deficiency issues, any appropriation law issues, have a wide range of services. Now, I would say we're also well-postured in order to continue to evolve to meet the needs of the Congress as they change. You know, GAO is a unique structure. The Comptroller General is selected from a bipartisan, bicameral Congressional commission, you know, confirmed by the Senate for a 15-year term. So we have more continuity than any other federal agency, and it's important then to use that wisely to continue to enhance our services. We have a tremendous, dedicated, talented, multidisciplinary task force with all sorts of skills. We have a strong strategic planning and strategic foresight operation. We've been ranked consistently in the best places to work in the federal government. This year we were ranked #1 in mid-sized agencies across the government We have an extensive network of experts in the private, work with the private sector, academia, national academies, and other services. So I'm happy to be here. I appreciate the interest in GAO, and I'd be happy to enter into a discussion, dialogue about how we can continue to work on evolving to meet the Congress's needs.
Thank you. Our next witness is Mary Mazanek. Dr. Mazanek has served as director of the Congressional Research Service since December 2011. Before joining CRS, Dr. Mazanek served as a, I'm sorry? Oh, it's okay. Before joining CRS, Dr. Mazanek served as a Deputy Assistant Secretary and Director of the Office of Medicine, Science, and Public Health and the Office of the Assistant Secretary for Preparedness and Response at the Department of Health and Human Services. Dr. Mazanek, welcome. You are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Is it on?
Now it's on.
Anyway, thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today about the efforts of the Congressional Research Service to optimize its services for Congress. In addition to addressing your questions, I will highlight some of the initiatives CRS has undertaken to ensure that we continue to provide exceptional support to a 21st century Congress. I will also outline some of the challenges that CRS faces as it strives to keep pace with the evolving needs of Congress. Since its establishment in 1914, CRS has diligently carried out its mandate to provide Congress with timely, objective, nonpartisan research analysis and information. However, the current Congress operates in a markedly different environment than that of its predecessors. In addition, Congress continues to grapple with increasingly complex public policy issues in a period of constrained resources. Also, technological advancements provide Congress immediate access to more information sources than at any prior time in history. However, not all of these sources are authoritative and without bias. Also, as a result of advances in IT, congressional offices can now instantly communicate by way of email, the internet, and other web-based applications. These innovations have created expectations on the part of congressional users that the information analysis and consultative support they need will be readily available and accessible whenever and wherever they wish to retrieve it. To this end, as Congress has evolved in response to feedback from congressional stakeholders, the service has undertaken a number of initiatives, and I want to give you some examples. In order to meet the diverse needs of congressional users, in addition to our longer analytical reports, the service has developed shorter, more concise products to provide timely information and analysis on emerging issues. Also, CRS has diversified its product line, creating and piloting new visual and audio formats such as instructional videos, interactive graphics, and podcasts. These newer products enable members and staff to access the service's expertise at their convenience and in a format that they prefer. In response to congressional interest, CRS has instituted hiring actions to bolster expertise in emerging or expanding policy areas. For example, CRS created 12 additional positions to strengthen our support on science and technology issues. The service continues to work with the Library's Office of the Chief Information Officer to modernize its IT infrastructure. This multi-year initiative will provide CRS staff with the best resources to create and deliver products and services to Congress. Finally, CRS continues to collaborate with the Legislative Branch Bulk Data Task Force, the House Clerk, and the House Legislative Council to implement modern legislative data interchanges and develop tools and data standards that are critical to analyzing the impact of proposed legislation. Now I'd like to turn and flag 3 pressing challenges that the service faces. First, Continued recruitment and retention of a dedicated professional workforce is essential to the service's mission and is a top priority for CRS. Given the current market for talent, this will require resources to bolster and replenish the analytical capacity necessary to support the Congress. Additionally, CRS recognizes that Congress represents an increasingly diverse constituency. Therefore, it is imperative that the service continues to build and maintain a diverse workforce. As such, CRS is implementing a number of strategies to address this other top priority. Second, preserving CRS's institutional knowledge is an important component to our ability to serve you. CRS is developing and implementing strategies to manage the knowledge that it creates, including the capture of tacit knowledge held by senior analysts, attorneys, and information professionals. Third, our experience during the pandemic only reinforced the fact that information technology is a critical tool that the service employs to accomplish its mission. Implementing and maintaining useful technology is costly and labor-intensive, yet mandatory to support our work for you. Finally, I want to thank you for allowing me to contribute to this discussion today, and I will be happy to respond to your questions.
Thank you, Dr. Masnick. And our final witness on this panel is Philip Swagel. Dr. Swagel has served as the director of the Congressional Budget Office since June of 2019. Prior to joining CBO, he was a professor of international economics at the University of Maryland School of Public Policy. He previously served as the Assistant Secretary of the Treasury for Economic Policy from 2006 to 2009. Dr. Swagel has also served as Chief of Staff and as a Senior Economist at the White House Council of Economic Advisors. Dr. Swagel, you are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair Kilmer and Vice Chair Timmons and members of the Select Committee. Thank you for the opportunity to discuss the efforts of the Congressional Budget Office to enhance our transparency, our effectiveness, and efficiency. Today, I will highlight 4 aspects of our work. First, CBO was focused on responsiveness and on transparency. Beginning in fiscal year 2019, the Congress increased our budget to bolster that process, to expand staffing in high-demand areas such as healthcare and immigration, to organize our staff to work on broader shared portfolios, and to publish more data and documentation about our methods. And we report to the Congress about our work in progress every 3 months. We work hard to make our work accessible. We've improved access to our cost estimates in particular on our website, for example, by improving the search function and adding more information to the web pages for each bill. There's a link to the bill text and other information on congress.gov from the CBO landing pages. Okay, so that's one, on responsiveness and transparency. Second, we're working, as my colleagues here in the other agencies have said, to increase the diversity of our workforce. And attracting and retaining a diverse workforce, it helps us have the best possible staff, and our work benefits from these different perspectives and different experiences. So last year, in 2020, we created a diversity and inclusion working group, and the mandate of that group includes recommending ways to increase the representation of diverse staff, of women, minorities, people with disabilities in our agency's workforce, and then on the substance of what we do to ensure that all staff can contribute successfully to our work and to our culture. So that's number 2. Number 3 is we at CBO are increasing access to data. We have in place more than 36 data agreements for protected information, and we're working to arrange agreements that allow our analysts even greater access to data, and especially remote data. And we've done a lot during the pandemic to enhance our ability to access information remotely, and to do it securely as well, to guard against cyber threats. Then fourth and lastly, we continue to make organizational changes and operational changes to better serve the Congress. And part of that is that as legislation has grown more complex, we're just doing more work and spending more time providing technical assistance during the drafting stage of legislation. So it doesn't always result in a cost estimate, but our work will be generally with the committee staff while they're developing legislation. On cost estimates, we've prepared cost estimates more often for bills that are heading for votes without being marked up for committees. So, and we strive to do this to meet the needs of the Congress while fulfilling our statutory requirement to prepare cost estimates for bills approved by committees and other reports specified in law about the budget and the economy. We've reorganized our staff as well. Part of it is to address 3 priority areas that we see the Congress focusing on. One is healthcare, second is income security, and the third is the combination of climate, energy, and infrastructure. And we've also created a new unit in our budget analysis division focused on education, housing, and finance, essentially to improve our capacity to do cost estimates in those areas. So let me finish there. In conclusion, CBO remains committed to becoming even more transparent, more effective, and more efficient, and will continue to innovate to best support the Congress. Thank you.
There we go. Sorry. They're finicky. I now recognize myself and Vice Chair Timmons to begin a period of extended questioning of the witnesses. Any member who wishes to speak should just signal their request to either me or to Vice Chair Timmons. So I have 2 threads I want to pull, and then I'm eager to kick it to others. One, I just want to give you an opportunity that we're going to hear from a second panel of folks who've looked at your agencies from the outside and maybe have some ideas around areas we could optimize, better support your missions. I know you had a chance to look at their testimony, and I just wanted to invite, if you have insights into anything that they're going to tell us, I want to give you an opportunity to swing at that pitch. So, anybody have anything they want to say on that front? Yeah, go ahead. I'll just go down the line.
Yeah. First, I appreciate the interest always from anybody in ideas, and that's the way you improve your operations. The person who will be testifying regarding GAO is, complimentary of the accomplishments of the agency and is advocating for additional resources and makes a number of suggestions. I'm obviously very supportive of the increased resources there. There's one proposal, though, a major proposal that is made that I'm not in favor of at all, and that is creating a separate entity within GAO for science, technology, policy issues. This is how duplication and overlap start in the federal government. We've issued hundreds of reports on these issues over the years, and this is not a good idea. And I also don't think that placing a decades-old model that Congress has decided not to fund for 25 years in GAO is not my idea of modernization. And I just think it would be a bad idea. I think that the independent study done by the National Academy of Public Administration that concluded that Congress support GAO and CRS, and if Congress wanted an additional resource to create a small office in the Congress for technology absorption issues, I think that's a better approach in those areas. And so, to take, this, as I'm saying, an old model and put it in an otherwise well-functioning organization, it reminds me of the Hippocratic Oath, first do no harm. And I think that would harm GAO's reputation over time. And I'm happy to talk to Congress and focus on what outcomes that you want, as opposed to what kind of process that that we decide, and how we manage the agency. But bifurcating an agency is not a good idea.
Go ahead.
Okay, so I read with great interest that the new Ginsburg testimony.
You may want to move the mic closer. It may be on, but just far away.
Is it on?
That's on, yeah.
Okay, thank you. I take feedback about CRS very seriously, and I wish we could actually get more feedback from congressional users so that we can help you better. There are some points in her testimony that I agree with, and then there are other points that I do not concur with. I agree with the fact that Congress needs shorter products. We recognized this need about 5-6 years ago and started to create shorter products. We serve a diverse congressional user population, and they have varying needs. I do not agree that the longer analytical reports are not being read. I have heard from members and from congressional staff that they do read our longer analytical reports. We are always trying to present our research and analysis in different and new formats to be digested by the congressional user in the way that they find best for them. So that's one point. An issue was raised about a timeliness of a product, and that was the first I heard about that. Timeliness is one of our core values. We do whatever we can to meet your deadlines. However, we're a high-volume operation. In FY 2020, we had over 75,000 targeted research requests, and we have limited staff. And so we do prioritize, starting with requests that are time-sensitive. If they're tied to floor action, a markup, or something that is moving. We do talk to the requester. We try to come up with an agreed-upon approach moving forward. We try to meet your timeline, like I said, with what we can deliver on your timeline, because we know you have deadlines that you have to meet. The other issue that was surprising to me is an issue that was raised about gender issues and gender equity. As the first woman to head up CRS since its beginning, I take that very seriously. And in fact, last spring, we did look at hiring, salary, and promotion with respect to gender. And we did not find a consistent pattern that would suggest that there is a gender equity issue. But we're always tracking that and watching that. We do, like most federal agencies, we are challenged by the diversity issue. We want to recruit and retain a diverse workforce, and that would include women. Actually, we're predominantly women. We're 57% women at this point in time. So we have a strategic initiative focused on that. So I think those are the points that I would mention at this point, but I'm happy to follow up on other ones if you have specific questions.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. And yeah, I thought Phil Joyce's testimony was excellent, and I mean, he's written the book on CBO, so it's not surprising. I'll just mention two things from his testimony. One, the first one I just deeply agree on, and this the key aspect of making sure our work is nonpartisan and objective. And obviously that's, in some sense, my foremost responsibility as director. Fortunately, it's deeply embedded in the agency, and since the DNA of the agency. So that, I think in some sense, that's number one. In some sense, we're the opposite of Gene and opposite of GAO, right? Such a valuable part of the work at GAO are the recommendations, right? Here's a problem, here's suggestions on how to fix it, and we stay away from that. And again, it's a different mission. The other aspect of Phil's testimony that I think is really interesting, and I agree with, is the thinking about the broader issues. So the benefits, and of course CBO, our bread and butter is the cost. How much does something cost? But of course, we know members want to know, well, what are the benefits? And that we strive to provide as much information as we can. First explain the costs, and then provide the completeness on what are the impacts. And of course, the thing we need to stay away from is saying it's worth it or it's not worth it, because intrinsically that's up to you, up to policymakers, and not up to us. So that's just the balance we're trying to maintain, and agree with. Again, I agree with what he put. On broader issues, the other one that's something I've been thinking a lot about is what more information can we provide? And of course, there's a lot of interest in the Congress on distributional analysis. And we've been increasing our capacity to do that. We have longstanding reports on distributional issues, but we're trying to do more, and not just by income, but by geography, by race, by other, other dimensions. The data can be a challenge, but we're working on that. And the challenge is just those limitations. There's no distributional baseline. We don't know the distribution of the existing, current law. So it's hard to say how the distribution changes for every single piece of legislation. But it's something we're working on. And kind of the same thing applies to regulation, that the idea of having us analyze every regulation is kind of beyond the edge of what we do or set up to do. We can do it in a limited fashion if there's legislation to undo a regulation. Well, of course, we would analyze that and provide the costs and the impacts of that. But it'd be hard for us to do it more broadly.
I want to just piggyback on the point you just made, because I can't remember if it's the next or one of the next hearings that we're going to have is related to evidence-based policymaking. It seems like one of the things that Congress grapples with is, as an institution, members can't even agree on some of the facts and problem definition, let alone solutions. And so looking at how we elevate that issue is something that this committee is going to look at. A few of you mentioned in your testimony, trying to get more data analytic capabilities, access to data sets. I just want to ask hopefully a short, directed question, because I want to get to other members. Do you need anything further from Congress to be able to drive that kind of 21st century data analytic capabilities within your institutions, or do you got it covered? Do you need more access to data sets? Do you need more access to data scientists? Do you need more access to what?
All of the above. So we do deal with data sets, and we use it both for our research, but we also use it to track usage and utilization of our products and services so that we can better position ourselves to support the Congress. I think not only the resourcing the technology that is needed to mine the trends, we do have a balanced scorecard initiative at CRS that is in pilot phase, but also personnel, data scientists would also be helpful. So I agree with that. The more information we can get out of the data that we sit on, or data sets that other people have that we can obtain, and that would go to our research needs, which are expensive. Some of the research materials that we need to purchase are expensive, but that would be helpful.
Yeah, we've, as part of our effort to enhance our capabilities, we've set up an innovation lab in the science and technology function. And this would take a lot of data sets. I've hired our first chief data scientist at GAO from the private sector, well-qualified individual. We're bringing in additional data scientists. It's on our plan for this fiscal year to hire 6 or 7 more data scientists. So we're in the midst of doing that, and I've asked for additional resource for the Congress to expand it. Now, this data lab so far, we're working on identity verification issues as part of a joint project with OMB and the Treasury Department to really figure out, with all the fraud that occurs, to try to use data matching better to identity verification, how to audit blockchain technologies. We've issued a first foundational document on how to audit artificial intelligence algorithms and have a framework for that. So we're off to a very good start with this activity. Now, we've asked for some access modernization, and we've given Congress draft legislation to give us access to people and electronic data more. We have pretty good access to information throughout the federal government. We have unique access that really a lot of other people don't have, and so it's very important. But we're augmenting that with additional data collection. As you know, the amount of data that's available exponentially grows every year, and your ability to absorb it, it's very important. So we've started on this journey. We have a good plan. We're off to a good start. We could use some additional resources and help modernizing our access legislation.
Access to data is something I think about a lot. And we get access basically in two ways. One is from executive branch agencies, and then two is from the statistical agencies. Generally the executive branch agencies are pretty helpful. Just as an example that we're working on right now is on the toxic exposure legislation. There's bills in both the House and the Senate on this, and we've gotten a lot of information from the VA, the Veterans Administration, and they've been incredibly helpful. It's complex data we're asking for, sort of very detailed financial and health information. It's taken them a while, but they've basically come through. So that's the kind of success. It's just taken a while, but they've been helpful. The stats agencies, we get a lot of information from the census and the IRS. And of course, the challenge is the data security issue, right? We have to be good stewards of that and security, and we are, and we work carefully with those too. As the Congress wants more from us, that's something I would have to start thinking about is, if we're asked to do more distributional work, well, we might need more access to data as a result. And we're not there yet, so I'm not asking for more. And again, I would want to make sure that any data we get are just as limited as possible and not, so distinguish us from, say JCT, our sister agency, that has much broader access to tax information. And that's their business, and mine, I just want to stay limited, but it's something I'm thinking about.
Go ahead, Vice Chair.
Can I add something? After listening to my colleagues, I'd like to make another point. We also rely on data from executive branch agencies to inform our work for you. It's critical that we have access to the data. Occasionally, executive branch agencies are reluctant to share data with us. They ask us to submit a formal FOIA request, or they ask us why we need the data, who is it for, or they try to put restrictions on use of the data where they don't want us to share it with third parties. All of that would make it more difficult for us to support you. My authority to get information from the executive branch agencies is in the organic statute. It is derived from the committees, and the committees have to authorize, or I have to act as an agent of the committee. I do not have subpoena power, or so anything to strengthen the authority that I have or the ability for me to get the data would be appreciated.
Great, go ahead.
Thank you. Well, first, you said you liked feedback at CRS. Let me give you my feedback. I have had an incredible time working with some of your cybersecurity experts, probably spent, 6 or 8 hours with them, and they are extremely knowledgeable and generous with their time. So I've had a great experience. Along those lines, what % of Congress members or staff offices do you think reaches out to CRS on an annual or a 2-year basis?
So every year, virtually 100% of members' offices and committee use CRS in some manner. I think the real challenge is making congressional users aware of the full spectrum of support that we offer to them. It's not just our written products. And so we have intensified our outreach, especially at the beginning of a Congress or the beginning of a session, to try to make them aware of everything we can do to support their work for the American people.
I'm surprised at that answer, but I think that's fantastic. Thank you. Each of your agencies mentioned retention, recruitment as an issue. Obviously, during the pandemic, we saw the capabilities of video teleconferencing. And do you anticipate offering telework positions? Obviously, you're somewhat limited with your resources, but I got to tell you, the dollar goes a lot further in South Carolina than it does here in Washington. So, you know, is that something y'all are looking at to try to facilitate better staffing opportunities? Start with
I can answer first. Yes, it is. And, you know, we anticipate as we continue to come back into the office, you know, more fully, that we will have some positions that the staff have the option to be fully remote. It's gonna be, you know, a limited number, and we're gonna look at it carefully and start carefully, but I do anticipate that. And then on some spans of work, it could be someone's gonna be able to work for a couple weeks remotely, you know, maybe if not full-time. So we do seek doing that.
So we were in a hybrid situation pre-pandemic. We had a telework option. Within a 24-hour period at the start of the pandemic, we transitioned to a virtual environment, and I think we've done fairly well. Telework is governed by a side agreement to our CBA. We are in the middle of negotiations. We're also within the library, and the library has a framework for telework. We certainly have learned a great deal about the experience during a pandemic. I suspect that post-pandemic, we will have, again, a hybrid work environment with increased flexibilities. We will have telework within the capital region, but at this point, we are not planning to offer telework at a distance.
Yeah, first, you know, we don't have a problem with recruitment and retention. I mean, our retention rate's 94%. Past few years, it's gone down. I mean, we're almost like, you know, 5% attrition we're expecting. We've been able to attract and retain a very diverse workforce in GAO. We have 58% women, 34% minorities. We've been ranked #1 in the government for several years on commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion issues. We allowed telework pre-pandemic in a very generous way. People could work up to 66 out of 80 hours in a 2-week pay period remotely and telework. I expect that to continue. That's why we didn't have much problem moving to telework. Now, what we have learned, though, in the pandemic, as you're saying, Congressman Timmons, is that when we opened up recruitment, particularly for interns, which is our main pipeline for hiring, we were able to get a more diverse group of interns by not having them be in our field offices or in GAO headquarters. So we're moving to have our internship program be open for more remote learning as well. And I have a group studying what the operating posture would look like when we come out of the pandemic, and then we'll have to negotiate with the union. But these are very important issues, so I'm open to considering these things. You know, so we'll work through them. But on the intern thing, I think it's a great idea, and I've talked to a number of other members who have the same views that you do.
Great. One other quick question. We made recommendations last Congress regarding the schedule to essentially be here more and travel less. I imagine it wouldn't affect your two agencies if Congress was here 50% more. For example, in 2019, we were here 65 full working days and 66 travel days. You can make some changes to the schedule that would allow us to be here 90 days, maybe 110 full days a year. I don't think it would affect y'all, but there was talk that maybe y'all have issues with the congressional calendar and capacity. Could you speak to that, or is that?
Sure. I can speak. I mean, in some sense, we work however the Congress works. The challenges with the calendar and the schedule come, just in some sense, the budget process, right? Sort of the way the budget process is working is not exactly the way it was set down in the 75 Act. We'll put it that way. So that poses a challenge. I mean, even things like, when is our next budget update? Well, knowing if the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act and whatever the next, reconciliation bill, if those are enacted or not enacted, that would affect the macroeconomy, that would affect, throughout the budget. And so we're sort of on hold with our next budget update waiting. So that's the kind of scheduling challenge we have.
So it's not so much if Congress were here more, it would create a capacity issue. It is more whether we do our job in a timely manner, and that's more the issue.
Right, I mean, and again, we support the Congress however the Congress works. But those are the challenges. And when the Congress is away, we're pretty engaged with the staff. So that, so that works fine.
Do y'all have any issues with if Congress was here 50% more full working days, no capacity issues? Okay.
No,
Right.
yeah, the main thing I would comment on is if there's anything that could be done to make sure that the appropriations are done on time. One thing I never aspired to be in the government is an expert managing under continuing resolutions. And and that has an effect on your ability to plan and manage. I mean, that would affect people in the private sector or affect anybody. And so, we've been able to adapt and deal with things. But to me, that's the most important timing issue that I would encourage, Congress to consider.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yield back.
Ms. Williams is on virtually.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to apologize to all of our witnesses and the fellow committee members this morning for being virtual and not in person, but going back to Mr. Timmons and talking about scheduling, Congress needs a scheduler because I have 3 committee meetings that are running concurrently this morning and trying to make it work. So I apologize when I have to drop off, but I also have a full House Financial Services Committee meeting and a TNI subcommittee hearing on aviation, which my district has the world's busiest airport, and this is something that I also must chime in on. So again, Congress needs a scheduler, but I am so glad to hear about the diverse hires in the GAO office and all that you've done to make sure that your offices are truly representative of our country and the diversity that makes up so many of our districts, because we know that our lived experiences that we bring to the table in our work makes our country so much better and so much more rich. And so I'm just wondering of some ideas and strategies that we could share with CRS. And I'm thrilled to hear that you have such a high number of women working at CRS, but would love to hear more around direct strategies to increase the diversity in the office.
I suspect that's my question.
And maybe the Office of GAO can give some recommendations since they've done such a great job at diverse hires.
So right now, our staff is roughly 75% white and then 25% non-white. And over the last, at least the last 6 years, diversity has been a top priority, another top priority for us. We have, I stood up a diversity and inclusion work group to make recommendations about how we can increase the percentage or the number of applicants to our jobs that come from diverse backgrounds. And we also have expanded our outreach efforts so that we are reaching out to entities that represent underrepresented populations. We participated in 42 job fairs last year, many of which were held by institutions or colleges, schools that have a diverse student population. We are also trying to guarantee that our hiring panels have diversity represented. And so with all of that, my hope is that we will start to see more diverse applicants in the pool. Anecdotally, the last 2 hiring panels that I served on, I was very happy to see such a diverse applicant pool. And then once we are able to hire individuals, we want to also be able to retain them. So we want our workplace to be inclusive. To that end, we have in the past year provided 4 trainings to staff on topics such as allyship and microaggressions. And we also added a 5th training session for managers on conflict resolution, alternate dispute resolution. So I would love to hear if there are other things that we could put in place in CRS to address the challenge of diversity.
Thank you. Anyone want to give any tips on how you've been successful at increasing the diversity in your respective agencies?
Well, I've made it a key priority of my tenure, and I have a special assistant for diversity, equity, and inclusion that reports directly to me. We've focused on trying to drive it down through the agency. I mean, my job is to set the right policies and tone, but to have it operate at each level. And I've allowed people to develop communities of practice, for example, our African-American senior executives decided to meet on their own. I meet with them on a regular basis. They bring ideas, they bring new energy, they bring things that we've been able to implement. I've had that same experience with other groups. I've set up a diversity advisory council at GAO. We have questions in our annual employee survey where we ask people their views on our policies, whether their supervisors committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and we consistently have rated over 80% positive response rates on that. We have training programs. We have a diversity, equity, and inclusion strategic plan with performance measures and goals that we check. So, you know, we employ all sort of good management best practices to this, but it requires a sustained commitment, and you have to set the right tone and follow through.
Thank you.
Mr. Joyce, and then I got Mr. Phillips, and then we'll move on to the next panel. If we can have short questions and short answers, I want to keep us on track.
Thank you, Chairman Coleman. You know, one of the things I've learned since I've got here is everybody comes with great ideas on how to get things done. And as an appropriator, Chairman Kilmer and myself, we see a lot of these programs, and then you try to fund them, and you realize when you're doing that, that there's a duplication, triplication sometimes across different agencies regarding that. I was just wondering how, you know, GAO, if there's a way that you can help us sort of streamline these programs and how members can tell and make these programs achieve their outcomes, but become more cost-effective in doing so.
Yeah, actually, I mean, we spend a tremendous amount of time doing that. You know, one of the things that we've been doing for the last 11 years is an annual report on overlap, duplication, and fragmentation in the federal government. We've made 1,200 recommendations. About 70 have been fully or partially implemented. That has saved over $500 billion in financial benefits. There are tens of billions of dollars additionally that could be achieved by following our other recommendations in this area. But this is an endemic problem, not only among agencies, but within some individual agencies is a problem. And so we have all kind of recommendations on this. We'd be happy to brief your staff or work with you on it, but that's high on our agenda. And a lot of our work makes things more efficient. Our recommendations makes operations more efficient, even if there is an overlap or duplication or fragmentation in the agency. But it's important also that Congress not build in new fragmentation, overlap, and duplication in some of the new initiatives, because what we find, the way this happens, as you say, everybody has a great idea, and sometimes what's in place isn't working effectively, so rather than try to make it work effectively, we create a new program here, you know? And this is true, you know, we found like, you know, dozens of education programs outside the education department, and you know, housing programs, science, technology, engineering, and math studies. I mean, there's just a proliferation of these activities. And, you know, on the legitimate side, there are a number of problems that require multiple agencies to be involved. And there you want to have good collaboration and coordination. So you can't have everything isolated. You know, you need multidisciplinary approaches, but you don't need unnecessary duplication.
Well, thank you very much. I'll take you up on that next appropriation season.
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Happy to help, whether you're in town or not.
All right, Mr. Phillips.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all. I appreciate the value add to both the Congress and the country. But would any of you say that Congress takes advantage of your respective services, educational and otherwise, in a way that you would like to see? Do any of you feel that we really get the most out of your respective basket of services? Any of you?
Yeah, go ahead, Phil.
Yeah.
Okay, sure. Yeah, I mean, I feel like we do. It varies by offices. You know, most of our work is for the chairs and
course.
ranking members and leadership, and they do. And so the challenge for us is that we're working so much for them. You know, say in healthcare, you know, the different committees in the two chambers on healthcare absorb the you know, time so much that it's hard for us to do other things. Even when we can't do a cost estimate for, you know, a member who's not a chair or ranker, we provide technical assistance. And that varies. In some sense, it's probably on me and on CBO to make sure that offices know that they can come to us, even if they're not the committee chair, and that we're probably not gonna be able to do a cost estimate, but we can do other things, and that's something I can do.
And I'll ask each of you the same question. And do you track engagements by do you know how many offices have, and can you give us a sense of how many offices?
It's a good question. We do track. I don't have it off the top of my, you know, top of my head. It varies by issue. On healthcare, just there's so much across the board. An issue like opioids, where opioid use disorder, we hear from just many members. And this is, that's part of what we do, is try to understand the interest in members and build up our technical capacity. I just mentioned one last thing, which is surprise billing, which we sort of, we realized was an issue that was building, and so we built the technical capacity. And it was partly from our seeing what was going on in the world, but also partly from hearing from members that they wanted to know about it. And so we were ready.
I appreciate it. Either of you two. Same question. Do you think Congress fully utilizes your services, and do you track engagement, and what does that look like?
So, as I said, virtually 100% of offices and committees use CRS in some manner. Not everyone uses our full breadth of products and services, and part of that is because they're not aware of it, so we have to be more aggressive about outreach. We do tailor our support to the needs of the individual member or congressional staffer. And since there are very diverse needs, that's part of the challenge. Some people want, you know, just the high points on an issue. Other people want us to do a more deeper dive, in-depth analysis. And obviously, any feedback we get from our congressional users about what we could do to better support them, we try to accommodate them. We try to create new products that are useful to them.
I appreciate it.
Yeah, we regularly provide services to 90% of the standing committees of the Congress and the members of those committees. We try to outreach to as many individual member offices as we can with brown bags. We also provide training, sort of a GO 101 training for new congressional staff. We provide training for congressional staff in appropriations law and GAO's role in appropriations law. But I've been trying for a decade to get more GAO involvement in the orientation of new members. And if you could help me there, it's not for lack of trying, all right?
I was hoping we might get there, and that's exactly my point. You know, this is my second term, and as I come to recognize the breadth of services that you can provide, not to mention the education for new members in particular, when we're bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, is a tremendous opportunity, and I just encourage our chairs to consider that as we move forward. I would have loved a little bit more deep dive during our orientation. When Democrats and Republicans digest information and education together, I'm convinced we process it in a much more objective fashion. And I would strongly encourage our body to consider how to incorporate some deep dives into the issues facing the country during our orientation program.
Yeah, I would be more than happy to do that. I've been trying.
You've got a champion.
I've been trying. And I think it does have the effect that you have. And plus, our policies, we try to encourage as much bipartisan requests for our work as possible. And a lot of our work comes in requests from committees or mandates from Congress, which by definition are bipartisan. So those things are very, very important. And I think it's needed now more than ever because of the increased turnover in the Congress, not only among members, but staff are moving around quite a bit. You know, this is my 49th year in GAO. So I've seen, you know, and it's different now than it historically has been, and so that's even more important.
It's my 52nd year on Earth. But thank you, very sincerely, and especially in an era where there seem to be two sets of facts increasingly, even within this institution. The more that we can bring people together under one set of facts, I strongly encourage, and thank you all.
I agree, sure.
Great. Mr. Davis.
Can you hear me? Thank you. Sorry, I'm running behind. I actually wanted to get here. Great to see you all here, but Dr. Mazanek, thank you for what you do at CRS. I'm a little disappointed that we can't do an oversight hearing in House Administration to talk about some of the issues that I think that, well, if I don't set the agenda there, so I'm hoping that Chairperson Lofgren will, and that we can talk a little more in depth. I'm going to submit some questions for the record because I know my colleagues want to get to the next panel, and I do too. But we have some issues with jurisdictional issues. You know, many of my colleagues have brought up some complaints with some of the products that are coming, be it timeliness, be it a possible bias, some other issues, the quality of product that I would really like to sit down with you personally and talk about and be able to get some of these questions answered, and accountability too. Whereas we can then achieve the same goals that I think all of us around this table want to see CRS and every staff member in each office be able to achieve. So I won't take any more time unless you wanted to make a comment.
I'll be happy to follow up with you so that we can have an in-depth discussion on some of the issues you've just mentioned.
Well, I had a really good set of questions, but because I couldn't get her on time, Chair Kilmer is doing the right thing and not allowing me to sit and talk for 20 minutes. So thank you for that, and you're welcome to everybody else. But Doctor, let's do that. Again, even if we could do one-on-one at some point, I would really, truly appreciate it as we move into this Congress and the next. Thank you.
Okay.
Yield back.
I do want to actually just, and we really have to get to the next panel, so if I can ask for just really quick responses. One of the points that Mr. Davis mentioned, I think, is a thread that we could pull on. And some of you in your testimony, and I think Dr. Mazanek, you mentioned that there was, you know, you worked with Gallup and you got, you know, tried to survey how we doing, basically. I guess one of the things I'm interested in is do your agencies get or have the opportunity for really real-time feedback on, you know, so I got this report, you know, I mean, there's a lot of things that I consume where I can go on Yelp or I can, you know, provide immediate feedback. You know, when I go through the airport at Clear before I'm done, I have an email saying, how was your experience? Do your agencies do something like that where when I get a CRS report or I get a GAO report, there's an immediate opportunity for, as an end user, to say, this was helpful, this wasn't helpful, here's how it could have been more helpful? Do you already do that?
Yeah,
So-
GAO does.
Yeah, we do at GAO. We don't get a high response rate back from the Congress, but we ask the question. You know, some people say, well, look, we're happy. If we're not happy, we'll let you know.
Yeah.
You know, so I assume that, but we do ask.
Yeah.
Was it timely? Did it meet your needs? And then we have, you know, I try to meet with chairs and ranking members of all the committees and get direct feedback too. That way. That's not the only way we do it, but we do it on a product-by-product basis as well.
So we do try to solicit feedback. Congressional attendees at our seminars are asked to fill out a form afterwards to provide us with feedback. We get a lot of feedback. It's not officially solicited. We can explore a more regular solicitation. Part of the challenge we have is the response rate. Even with the Gallup surveys that we have done every 2 years, we get 10% of the people that we send the survey to actually respond. I would love to get more feedback. from members. I do try to meet with members, but you have busy schedules. I can't always get a meeting with you. I'm happy to meet with your chief of staff or your LD to get feedback. Obviously, if you have an issue with your report, with a report that we've issued or a response to a request, I want to hear about it.
I know we got to get to the next panel, but if you
Yeah.
have a just quick swing.
I'll be super fast. And we do it in two ways. One is directly, if someone doesn't like a cost estimate or has objections with it, they find us quickly so that's one. We do surveys, we track things on our website, where people are coming from. So we do a little bit. We also work with the budget committees, and both sides, all four corners of the budget committees are extremely helpful for us, basically, sort of flagging people who are upset or building, moving toward being upset with us.
Terrific. I want to thank all three of our distinguished panel members for their testimony and for joining us to share their insights. Thank you. And with that, let me invite up our second panel. And while they're coming up, I'm going to read their bios just so we can stay on schedule. We're now joined by three experts who are here to share their ideas for modernizing the products and services the legislative support agencies provide to an evolving Congress. Witnesses are reminded that their written statements will be made part of the record. Our first witness is Zach Graves. Mr. Graves is the head of policy at Lincoln Network. His research and advocacy focus on the intersection of technology and governance issues, including work to strengthen science and technology expertise and capacity in Congress. He's a member of the GAO's Polaris Council, an advisory body of leading science and technology experts. And in 2018-2019, he was a Technology and Democracy Fellow at the Harvard Ash Center. Mr. Graves, if you're ready, are you ready?
All set.
All right, cool. We're just rolling because I went a little overtime with that last panel. So you are now recognized for 5 minutes.
All right, thank you. Chair Kilmer, Vice Chair Timmons, and members of the committee, thank you for having me here to testify. My name is Zach Graves. I'm head of policy at the Lincoln Network. We're a right-of-center organization working to advance innovation, governance, and national security, and work to bridge the gap between Silicon Valley and DC. This year marks the 100th anniversary of the Nonpartisan Government Accountability Office. Over its history, GAO has provided essential oversight, insight, and foresight to Congress, supporting its legislative and oversight functions. This work has a direct and tangible benefit to taxpayers. Over the past 20 years, GAO's work has resulted in more than $1.1 trillion in savings. GAO's return on investment has consistently exceeded over $100 for each dollar of its budget. Despite its impressive record, however, GAO's tools and resources have not kept up with demand. Even as federal spending and the national debt have massively increased, GAO's staffing level is 37% smaller than it was 3 decades ago. Over its 100-year history, GAO's mission, authorities, workforce, and strategic focus have evolved significantly. The agency was established as the General Accounting Office in the Budget and Accounting Act of 1921, moving this function out of the Treasury. Coming out of the New Deal and heading into World War II, growing federal programs placed significant new demands on GAO, and it expanded to nearly 15,000 staff. The next few decades saw GAO move away from its green eyeshade era of accounting-focused work towards program evaluation and a more professionalized workforce. By the late 1960s, GAO was recruiting more staff trained in non-accounting fields, including science and technology in particular. With the backdrop of an unpopular war in Vietnam and the aftermath of Watergate, this period also saw Congress reassert itself. This included major reforms in the Legislative Reorganization Act of 1970, increased staffing resources, the creation of the Congressional Budget Office, which testified earlier, and the Office of Technology Assessment, or OTA. These reforms helped rebalance Congress's information asymmetry with the executive branch and allowed it to reassert itself. Coming out of the Cold War and heading into the 1990s, the pendulum swung back away from Article 1. Congress downsized GAO and enacted across-the-board cuts to the legislative branch, particularly in the 104th Congress. This included reductions for committees and support agencies and the elimination of OTA. The GAO emerged out of this period that was perhaps more lean and responsive, but also significantly more risk-averse. Science and technology in GAO. Since OTA was defunded, there have been numerous efforts to reestablish its function. This led to the creation of a technology assessment pilot in GAO in fiscal year 2002. While it had some initial success and was praised by outside reviewers, it did languish in relative obscurity for nearly 2 decades. In January 2019, GAO elevated this program to become the STAA, or Science, Technology Assessment and Analytics Team. With the support of the current Controller General, STAA has doubled its staff, refined its TA methodology, produced numerous spotlights, technology assessments, and other kinds of analysis, and its innovation lab has worked to develop innovative new approaches to program evaluation and oversight. A congressionally directed report by the National Academy of Public Administration endorsed STAA, but echoed longstanding concerns about the suitability of GAO's culture and bureaucracy for S&T work, and particularly for technology assessments, highlighting that there are some major challenges remaining to its governance. In my written testimony, I list actionable recommendations to improve STAA's governance, including adopting some of OTA's structural features, like an advisory version of its governing technology assessment board, mirroring the relationship that CRS has with the Library of Congress, and having an appropriations line item and congressional budget justification. Importantly, these are ultimately still under the Controller General's authority and not an independent office. Providing additional bureaucratic separation is also something that can be done as a spectrum and not an either-or. Nor is this an original idea. In 2004 and 2005, Rush Holt and Ammo Houghton advanced a bipartisan proposal called the CSTA that would create an OTA-like office in GAO, and went through several rounds of vetting by then Controller General David Walker, as well as S&T experts, and there are several iterations of this draft with commentary that I'm happy to provide. I also list a number of low-hanging fruit improvements to enhance STAA, including giving it an office in the Capitol, a separate website and intranet portal, and to have it self-initiate more reports under the CG's authority rather than to react to issues on request, which can take a year or more to complete and often are out of touch and not appropriately, doing horizon scanning and the importance of sort of foresight work that is key to science and technology issues. I also offer recommendations to strengthen GAO writ large, including estimating potential savings from unimplemented recommendations, which is something that was discussed at the earlier panel, addressing internal IT challenges, increasing funding for the agency, and adjusting its funding model to be a share of federal discretionary spending so it's not constrained by the particular political environment of the legislative branch's 302B suballocation. I also propose a series of reauthorization hearings to address the full range of GAO reforms, many of which I was not able to get to in my testimony. Throughout its history, GAO has shown it can adapt and restructure to meet new challenges. It's gone through several iterations in the past. With new tools such as machine learning, cloud-based data analytics, and others, GAO has a monumental opportunity to modernize for the next century and advance a vision to transform Congress's ability to understand and oversee federal programs in real time. Yet, I fear the low salience of these issues, insufficient resourcing, and institutional bias towards the status quo risks depriving GAO of significant opportunities to stay relevant and maximize future taxpayer savings. As we move into the future, we must consider that risk aversion in this domain is itself a massive risk. I look forward to the important work of this committee in helping address these challenges, and I thank you for the opportunity to testify.
Thank you, Mr. Graves, and I encourage folks to look at the written testimony too. I appreciated you had a number of recommendations you thought this committee should pursue, and I know we weren't able to get to it in your verbal remarks, but I really appreciate it. Our next witness is Dr. Wendy Ginsburg. Dr. Ginsburg is the staff director on the Government Operations Subcommittee on the House Committee on Oversight and Reform. Prior to joining the committee, she was a senior program manager at the Partnership for Public Service, and from 2007 to 2017, she served as an analyst at the Congressional Research Service. Members are reminded that Dr. Ginsburg's testimony today represents her own personal thoughts and not those of the subcommittee or the chairman. Neither her testimony nor her responses to any questions will touch on any specific matter the Oversight Committee has investigated, the Oversight Committee's investigative practices, nor any specific matter that she worked on as an analyst at CRS. She will be limited to providing observations and recommendations to improve the services of CRS and the other agencies that support congressional staff. Dr. Ginsburg, you are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you for that, and thanks for that preamble. Thank you, Chairman Kilmer, Vice Chair Timmons, and other members of the Select Committee for inviting me here to testify on ways to improve Congress's service agencies. Thank you to each of the witnesses from our first panel. Honestly, we couldn't perform our constitutional duties without them and the hard work of the people in their agencies. I've been asked to testify today because of my unique perspective on the Congressional Research Service. I proudly served as a nonpartisan CRS analyst for nearly a decade. Today, I'm a user of CRS's services as the staff director of the Committee on Oversight and Reform's Subcommittee on Government Operations. I proudly serve Chairman Gerald E. Connolly and this nation by conducting oversight of the appropriations of the entirety of our federal government, as well as state and local governments. With a jurisdiction so vast, I rely on CRS, the Government Accountability Office, and the Congressional Budget Office to help me perform the almost insurmountable oversight needed to ensure our government runs smoothly and effectively. My testimony today represents my own personal thoughts, and like Chairman Kilmer said, not the thoughts of the subcommittee, the chairman, the full committee, or the chairwoman. I will make 3 main points about how the Congressional Research Service could take straightforward steps to modernize and dramatically improve its service to Congress. These comments are laid out in greater detail in my written testimony. 1, CRS must revamp its product line and how its products are distributed to members, congressional staff, and the public. 2, CRS must transform its culture to one that is focused on customer service. And 3, CRS must refocus its efforts on accomplishing its core mission. 30, 40, or even 75-page reports will not be read by most congressional staff. I agree, there's a couple who will read them all, but most of them won't read them. These reports are daunting and, frankly, can confuse staff more than help them. CRS must generate products that combine legal and policy analysis and not make us go to several sites to figure out the policies that we need to know about a single subject. And did you know that CRS has podcasts? I know that Dr. Maznek said that in the earlier, panel, but you can't find them on the website, and there's only been one made this year, one in February. Most of the videos on the website are more than an hour long, too long to be of use to Congress and staff. The CRS search engine puts outdated reports at the top of its results page, and I can't even try to search for a product on the site from my iPhone. As a former CRS analyst, it pains me that the great CRS research done by my former colleagues is not more easily located by decision makers. Why is CRS not generating newsletters targeted to each committee and subcommittee with products that are likely of relevance to them? Why is CRS not asking for member and staff feedback on their products and services? There is not a feedback button on the website. Moreover, CRS could allow its staff to serve details in personal offices and on committees, providing CRS experts the opportunity to understand which products work for us and how to more effectively provide authoritative information in a timely fashion. My second point, CRS must evolve its culture to one focused on customer service. CRS's mission is to serve Congress, yet when we call CRS analysts and attorneys, we are sometimes told that our research question is the wrong one or that it can't be answered. I've been told that my request is not a priority for CRS. I have had to contact analysts and attorneys several times to track down outstanding requests. On another request, I was told that my request was, quote, too in the weeds for consideration. CRS is designed for these weeds. There are a few simple ways CRS leadership could take critical steps toward better customer service. First, CRS analysts and attorneys should simply take the initiative to place an electronic calendar hold on staff calendars for consultation appointments. Even that is so helpful to me. Next, CRS should consider incorporating customer service metrics into performance reviews. It shouldn't be the whole review. We shouldn't be reviewed by a panel of the many, but it should be a component of how you're assessed as a CRS analyst. Third, CRS must do better in helping its staff adapt to new online platforms used by the House and Senate. CRS needs to get technology right. Finally, analysts and attorneys must connect members and staff directly with the expert or experts they need and not send us on a goose chase to collect and find the right people to help us answer our questions. These actions would help defeat a culture of this is not my issue that currently permeates CRS. My final point, CRS must refocus its efforts on accomplishing its core mission. CRS at times has allowed its staff to stray from its mission to serve Congress or allowed that mission to atrophy. CRS should be anticipating the needs of Congress, yet in many cases, reports on pertinent legislative and oversight issues are released days after the relevant hearing. CRS must observe and follow the rhythms of congressional needs and prioritize the research and analysis accordingly. Additionally, CRS must encourage its staff to engage in the academic and policy debates in public forums, at academic conferences, CRS attorneys and analysts either prevented from or uninterested in evolving cannot provide members and staff the highest quality of research, analysis, and information that's required by the agency's mission. I end my testimony by reiterating my high regard for all the support agencies, particularly CRS. I want them to be the most effective they can be to help Congress serve this nation. Without them, we repeat errors, we miss nuances. We would simply be too overwhelmed to function. We must evolve and improve together, leveraging technologies and refocusing resources to pack the most punch for this nation. I look forward to the conversation today. Thank you for inviting me to testify.
Thank you, Dr. Ginsburg. And our final witness on this panel is Philip Joyce. Dr. Joyce is Senior Associate Dean and Professor of Public Policy at the University of Maryland School of Public Policy. He's the author of The Congressional Budget Office, Honest Numbers, Power, and Policy Making. You actually did write the book on CBO. Dr. Joyce is a former editor of Public Budgeting and Finance, is a past president of the American Association of Budget and Program Analysis, and is past chair of the American Society for Public Administration Center on Accountability and Performance. Dr. Joyce has over a decade of public sector work experience, including 5 years as a principal analyst with the Congressional Budget Office. Dr. Joyce, thanks for being with us. You are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. Chair Kilmer, Vice Chair Timmons, members of the committee, thank you for inviting me to share my views on the role of the Congressional Budget Office in supporting the Congress. I want to express at the outset my admiration for what this committee is trying to accomplish. There's no more important issue, in my view, facing our political system than ensuring that the Congress remains a strong body capable of serving as an independent voice in our political system. Weak, understaffed, or outdated support agencies invariably would contribute to a weaker Congress and therefore transfer power to the executive branch. I'm here to talk specifically about CBO, although I am an admirer of all the congressional support agencies, and I would note regarding CBO that the Congress has a lot to be proud of in having established and supported this agency. There have in fact been many countries who have looked at CBO's successes. Australia, Canada, Italy, Korea, Mexico, I think are the best examples, and established similar independent fiscal agencies. In that sense, congressional organization has served as a model for the modernization of legislative institutions in other countries. I submitted my statement for the record, but I want to highlight 3 points, and then if there are others, we can discuss them in Q&A. And I make these points mainly because I think it's important that this committee focus on how we can educate members of Congress on why CBO exists, on how to use CBO, and what the limitations are of CBO analyses. First, it's important to note that history shows that CBO has done exactly what it was intended to do, which is to empower the Congress relative to the President and to serve as a check on the executive branch. When I was researching my book on CBO, and I want to say, Mr. Chairman, that it's the best book ever written on CBO because it's the only book ever written on CBO. It's also the worst book ever written on CBO.
Sorry.
There were multiple executive branch officials who told me that they used the fact that there would be CBO analyses to prevent more dishonesty in presidential proposals. Second, the most influential effects of having CBO have come through its cost estimates of legislation, as Director Swagel pointed out. To that end, I think any evaluation of its success needs to look at how those estimates are prepared, their accuracy, their timeliness, their consistency, and their transparency. I want to highlight a couple of these. CBO has paid a lot of attention over its history to making sure that it is using a consistent set of assumptions in costing out proposals, so that one proposal is not disadvantaged relative to another simply because different assumptions are used. And while CBO, I think, has always tried to be relatively transparent in how it presents information to the Congress and about its assumptions, it's responded, I think, to congressional interest in more transparency in a number of ways that Director Swagel pointed to in his testimony. I've been particularly impressed with the attention to data visualization in recent years, which have made CBO products much more accessible and understandable. You see much less now of having to read the 40 or 50-page dense CBO report, and it gets summarized, I think, much better in a way that can be actually accessed by more members of Congress. I would point out one more thing on timeliness, which is it's very important, I think, if the Congress is going to make effective use of CBO for it to avoid considering legislation on the floor that does not have a CBO cost estimate. And I noticed in CBO's budget justification for last year that 25% of its estimates or 25% of the bills that were considered on the floor did not have a CBO cost estimate, and I think that should be avoided. Third, there have been criticisms that CBO analyses take an overly narrow view by focusing largely on federal budgetary costs and not on the benefits of legislation. This, of course, is what the Congressional Budget Act tells them to do, and I do think this criticism ignores much of the broader policy analysis work that CBO does. But to the extent that anybody thinks that CBO should systematically focus on cost and benefits in its estimates of legislation, I think that would be problematic, and I think that would compromise its nonpartisan reputation, because you don't have to move very far from that in order to suggest that CBO is essentially saying the Congress should do this and the Congress should not do that. In conclusion, far from the Congress needing to reform CBO in any kind of major way in pursuit of modernization, CBO, and I think the same can be said for GAO and CRS as well, is instead one of the most important factors that contributes to the modernization of Congress. In short, other countries want what the U.S. has, and frankly, they're often flabbergasted to discover that the Congress supports a large and influential nonpartisan agency in the midst of such a hyper-partisan political environment. It's important for the Congress to recognize that a credible nonpartisan CBO is vital to the ability of the Congress to set its own fiscal policy and to challenge the president, and I mean any president, on policy. If CBO ever became viewed as one more source of partisan noise, it would be of limited use to the Congress or the nation. The capacity for nonpartisan analysis from all the support agencies, not just CBO, should be protected. Once lost, it would not easily be regained. Thank you, and I look forward to conversation.
Thank you, Dr. Joyce, and congratulations for having the top-selling book on Amazon related to the CBO.
Yeah.
I now recognize myself and Vice Chair Timmons to begin a period of extended questioning of the witnesses. Any member who wishes to speak should just signal their request to either me or to Vice Chair Timmons. I have one broad question and one specific question. My broad question is that, these support agencies were all founded in the early to mid 20th century. They're largely all still operating under the same authorizations, even as they've had to adapt to changing circumstances. Are there any authorities that they currently don't have that would help them better fulfill the mandate to support Congress? Anything we ought to be looking at in terms of additional authorities that ought to be granted to these agencies?
I'm happy to start. So I do think Director Swagel sort of talked about this a little bit in his testimony, but I think data are available in much different ways now than they were when this agency was created. And I think, in particular, the ability to access data electronically. My understanding is that CBO, kind of prior to the pandemic, actually periodically had to sort of drive out to Suitland in order to get its, data from the census. And it got temporary authority to actually access the data electronically. I think it would be helpful to look into, continuing that kind of thing. So I think it's very important for them to be able to, to access the data that they need and to do it in a timely fashion and to not have to go through a lot of red tape in order to do that.
Yeah. I would say for CRS, I would agree with Dr. Mazurek that at times we kind of just used our charm and persuasion techniques to get information out of the agencies that we were hoping to get information from to help tell the story to members of Congress and their staffs. So it could be a consideration to think about some language that would more clearly state that CRS should be considered Congress pursuant to FOIA when asking for information. I don't know that you want to create something that's an adversarial relationship. There should be MOUs or particular ways to, again, use just charm and conversations to get things done. But it's something worth talking about.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple different important points here. One, just with respect to history, and I don't get into this in my testimony in detail, the GAO's authorities have changed at several points over its history, sometimes growing, sometimes being more constrained. I think it would be worthwhile doing a deeper dive into some of that, which is part of why I recommended series of kind of reauthorization hearings around the agency to really go deep on some of these issues, like their challenges getting data from executive agencies, or the need to potentially put more teeth on recommendations that they make that are unimplemented. I also know that there are authorities that exist that are just not being used. There was some discussion of using IPA authority to bring in outside science and technology experts for STAA at several different points. As far as I know, I don't believe they've started utilizing that yet. So part of that is just sort of the sort of internal culture and its willingness to sort of use what tools it has.
The other thing I wanted to ask about, we had testimony earlier this year regarding how state legislatures do business and how committees and state legislatures do business. I came out of a state legislature. I know Vice Chair Timmons did as well. We had some of these capabilities sort of tied to committees in a state legislature where there was nonpartisan staff related to oversight, kind of like GAO does, and related to research and even bill writing. Do you see value in this committee looking at trying to seed some of these capabilities within congressional committees, or is the current approach where these are kind of independent agencies that kind of service those committees? Are we doing it right, or should we be thinking about a different model?
I think it's important for the support agencies to have some connection and for there to be an oversight responsibility that committees have for making sure that the information that's provided continues to be sort of useful and timely. I think if that's done effectively, I don't think that it would be necessary to sort of, nest nonpartisan analysis specifically within the committees. I think for CBO in particular, I think the budget committees have actually been quite active in making sure that that CBO is responsive. Now CBO has maybe a benefit in the sense that the statute actually sort of lays out. There's a kind of a pecking order for committees that they work with, and those committees are therefore responsible for making sure that the information that's being provided is most useful. I think an example of what you're talking about actually would be the Joint Committee on Taxation. With the Joint Committee on Taxation has actually what is, by all accounts, a nonpartisan staff, but works for the Finance and the Ways and Means Committees. And I think, based on everything I know, that works pretty well. But I don't know that I would move a lot further than that.
I would say that there have been nonpartisan staff who have worked with committees in the past that weren't necessarily affiliated with GAO or CRS or any of the service agencies. But I think a more effective way to make this happen is to just really ramp up details and encourage detailees to go in and out. That way you have the separate wall of nonpartisan research, but you have somebody with the knowledge and experience of what it's like to be on the inside, so they know how to, they have been the customer, they know what they need to get served. And CRS just doesn't do that. I know when I was there, I fought to go on a detail, and it just couldn't happen. And it was...
Now you're a full-time detail.
And I was like, yes, it will happen. So yeah, and now I'm here. So that's my whole life story. Thanks.
Yeah, I would agree that, I think the loss of institutional knowledge, as the political winds change on committees is a major challenge. Committees are broadly, they have less absorptive capacity and less sort of staff capacity than they once did, and so increasing detailees, particularly from within the legislative branch, I think is a really good way to do that. I think GAO does a fantastic job at that, and particularly when it comes to science and technology issues where members of Congress and their staff typically don't come from those technical backgrounds. Having that informal, trusted, consultative relationship is a tremendous value, at least as valuable as producing the sort of long reports themselves.
Thank you. Go ahead, Vice Chair Timmons.
Dr. Ginsburg, thank you for your testimony. It's very helpful to get another perspective. I've had a good experience, but I've only used them very limited basis, and this has been very helpful. In addition to, I mean, I hear where you're coming from, 30, 40, 70 pages, that's long, not a lot of people can read them. I mean, could we just, a lot of those have executive summaries, though. I mean, could we still need the longer product to dive deep, but I do agree that maybe if it's over a certain number of pages, there should be a 3-pager or a 2-pager, something like that. That seems like a reasonable request.
I wholeheartedly agree with you. There are people who read the really long reports, but there are not a lot of them on the Hill, and they're going to be on the committees and they're usually going to be on the committees with a deeper dive. CRS is getting better at creating suites of products, and frankly, the fact that there are sort of at the beginning of each report, there's like an overview of the report, that's pretty new. That actually happened when I was at CRS, so probably sometime around 2013, 2014 was when they started doing the executive summaries. Before that, they just didn't do it. I think a lot of what we see at CRS, frankly, is because you get promoted based on the length and depth of your work, so there's an internal incentive to create longer products so that you go through the promotion process, where I think for the benefit of most staffers on the Hill, the shorter products would be a more effective way to feed us the information. And that's not to say, I don't want to equate shorter with not as knowledgeable. Sure. I think, in fact, shorter can be more knowledgeable and harder to write. I don't think it's any simpler. I think it's much more difficult to write in a pithy way.
And I've actually never used their search engine. I always use Google and just type CRS at the beginning of whatever I want. But I do agree that we could modernize it a little bit and maybe update it.
We do that inside of CRS too, but don't tell anyone.
Mr. Graves, you have 2 of your recommendations. Fully fund GAO. Do you know the difference between their current funding and what fully funded would be?
Well, there's a couple versions of that. One would be just meeting their current budget request, which I think we're pretty close to it in both the House and I think the Senate bill that just came out is slightly lower. But I would say, we should think about this in terms of its ability to match the growth of federal bureaucracy. So if we think about like how big of a share of discretionary spending were they in the 1990s versus how big the administrative bureaucracy is now, it's dramatically weaker than it was relatively. So I would consider a much more significant increase in GAO resourcing, and I think we'd see increased taxpayer benefits that match that in a very significant way.
I've always been a huge proponent of fully funding Congress and all of its support agencies because we spend trillions and trillions of dollars, and we need to figure out a better way of doing our job. Obviously, we're talking about budget appropriations, and we can't underfund the most important part of the federal government, in my opinion. Last thing, Dr. Joyce just bought your book, so you sold one.
I'm going to take that as a question not in need of an answer. I think that's, just say thank you, I guess. But we're really killing it on him.
When I get my royalty report, I'll know that you were the one.
You were the one. We're killing it on Amazon sales in this committee. Mr. Joyce.
Chairman Comer, thank you all for being here today. In a sort of a abbreviated form, if you wouldn't mind, what would be your top 2 recommendations that you would think that would help to, we could push forward to strengthen or modernize these support agencies? No, whoever wants to take it first.
Sorry. Yeah, I think, my first one is probably a little bit of a difficult one, which would be taking GAO resourcing outside of the legislative branch appropriations subcommittee funding, which has a peculiar set of internal political incentives that constrain its ability to grow at the rate of the federal government, which means our oversight capacity is constrained in its ability to grow to match the rest of the federal government. We've worked together to develop a bipartisan proposal on this that I mentioned in my testimony that would make it as a sort of share of other discretionary spending overall. And I think this plus giving an initial bump to their resourcing would be my top issue, particularly considering that they return over $100 in value for each dollar of their budget for taxpayers, and I think there's a lot of savings that are still on the table that they could help deliver.
Great.
My number one is really easy, like a complete revamping of the CRS website where you can see and understand the products more effectively and know what they have and can get it very quickly. I think that the content that they do make is incredible content. I just wish we could find it. And then the second thing I would say is really reinforcing a customer service focus from everyone at that agency so that they're getting our feedback regularly. There's a place for us to give that feedback, but a component of that customer service focus is really hiring a staff that's diverse and having a component of inclusion in that so that they can reflect the people that they're serving more effectively and be more customer centric.
Do you think that
Yeah,
I can.
There's a follow-up.
that they're, that, you know, perhaps they should be advising Congress on what reports should be mandated?
They should be advising Congress or Congress should be advising them? Wait.
They advise us, like, you know, they say they only have so much bandwidth. So if there's agencies that need to report, which reports are truly necessary?
I think that if there's a resource issue, they should be making that clear to the appropriators that there's a resourcing issue there. But in terms of what Congress's needs are, it should be definitely Congress telling CRS what to prioritize. We should be telling them what to prioritize, and they should be anticipating the needs of Congress by knowing they have a much longer history of what's happened in Congress. They should be able to see the cycles as they're coming their way. That's part of the glory of what it means to be from CRS, is to have this long-term view, to be able to anticipate and remember that these things have happened and what they've looked like and what the context is different now. So the arguments that they don't have the bandwidth there, I understand a lot of it, but a lot of it is just failing to appropriately prioritize and think through the needs of Congress.
Got it, thank you.
Yeah.
The fine Dr. Joyce.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Joyce. So the first is just sort of expanding on something I mentioned earlier, which is access to data and access to information. The thing that I did not mention earlier is, you know, the statute, the CBO statute basically says that the executive branch needs to respond if somebody from CBO calls and is looking for information from the executive branch, but it doesn't say who in the executive branch needs to respond. And I think there are a number of occasions where a CBO analyst will try to call an agency and they'll get the sort of Congressional Affairs Office. And they don't want to talk to the Congressional Affairs Office, they want to talk to the people who actually understand the programs. And so getting down to that level, and whether that requires some kind of a statutory change or something else, but I think, and it's uneven. You know, some agencies are very happy to have the CBO analysts, talk to somebody at the level of the program, but others it's more difficult. I think the second is, continued attention to how information is accessed. I teach a bunch of 18 to 23-year-olds, and they access the entire world through their phones. So if you can't access the products of these agencies on your phone in a way that is where it's easily accessible and you're able to kind of find the information you need, very quickly, then we're losing a large percentage of the population.
As someone who went to law school back in the days when you actually had to shepherdize cases by yourself in the law library, I appreciate that.
Right.
Thank you.
Dr. Joyce, are you related to Mr. Joyce?
Not that I know of.
Interesting.
Although he's from Ohio and I'm from northwestern Pennsylvania, so we're not that far away from each other.
Are you related to our other colleague, Dr. Joyce?
Not that I know of.
Dr. Joyce?
Maybe back in Ireland at some point, in the distant past.
Hey, this has been very interesting. I missed the last panel, but to hear the comments from each of you after, hearing from those who run these departments, it's interesting because I think you all bring up very valid points, and we all have the same goal, which is to make the House work better. I was very interested in a comment you made, Dr. Ginsburg. You mentioned, let me make sure I heard it correctly. You mentioned that people at CRS get promoted for the length of what they write?
I would say that when I worked there, there was a definite incentive to write the piece de resistance of your subject matter, and that the depth and length were a part of that calculus. There's a whole package that you put together for promotion, but showing that you have a deep knowledge is a component of that, and one way to demonstrate you have a deep knowledge is to write a really long report.
Really? Which is actually the antithesis of what we probably want in a congressional office to want to get to the point. Look, I was a 16-year staffer. I looked at CRS reports as gospel. You know, they put it out, and this is exactly what we thought it was one of the most well-researched pieces or articles that we could get to be able to respond to our constituents. As you can tell from my brief question that I'm going to follow up with Dr. Mazanek about, I don't sense that's the case as much anymore from my staff on House administration and my team, and that's frustrating. What can we do to change the culture if promotions depend upon longer reports, which is not conducive in today's day and age with social media and what have you? They're not putting out as many reports and fulfilling Congress's needs if they're worried about their own promotion and putting a booklet together that, I don't know about you, but, I mean, Joyce probably isn't going to read. I'd read it, but, you know.
I definitely think there can be a disconnect in many cases between what works within the agency and what serves the Congress. I think there needs to be conversations with the union inside of CRS about what we can do to make sure that we're all sprinting toward a mission that's the service of Congress, which is the mission. And how do we get there? And how do we make sure you're getting measured on the right metrics, that your performance is achieving that particular mission? And those are hard conversations. I just think we should be having them and not ignoring them.
So I really enjoyed your testimony, but give me the biggest surprise you've had moving from CRS. And were you customer facing there at CRS?
Yeah, I was one of the analysts who answered a lot of questions, particularly on Freedom of Information Act, federal advisory committees, all the stuff nobody knows anything about. That was my portfolio.
Oh,
Yeah.
very appropriate nowadays, very much so. What was your biggest surprise coming over here? I mean, you're staff director, so what was your surprise and how you then viewed CRS once you left?
I would say my biggest surprise was that in CRS, a lot of what you do is very insular work. You're almost like an academic, right? You're adjacent to an academic, and it's very solo. Whereas on the Hill, everything is collaborative. Every email I send has, I think, maybe too many people on it, but a lot of people on it so that we can all sort of be moving in the same direction together. And that's just not the culture at CRS. It's much more of a you do it solo and prove who you are as a more academic facing. And I don't expect CRS to become E&Y. I don't think that's right either. But there's got to be a balance that's struck where you're somewhere in between an academic institution and an institution that has this amazing pedestal helping Congress get its work done. And I don't think it's hitting there yet. I think it's leaning toward academia, and it needs to be a bit more of a forward-facing, customer service-focused entity.
Do you think that's the personnel they have there that's a problem? Do you think we need more people with experience like yours to be over there to try and relay and be that bridge between Congress and the congressional staffs and the insular CRS staff you just mentioned?
I think everyone should be a waitress at some point in their life. That's just me personally. But
I asked, do you want fries with that at my first job? And it's the best job that prepared me for this place.
agree. I think that CRS could, again, it's an academic arena, and a lot of people come out of academia from there. And academia is not known for its customer service. So if you're in a leadership position, you might want to help get some training for people on what it means to be customer focused and customer centric. And I never got that once when I was at CRS.
Last question / comment. My questions I had for Dr. Mazanek actually centered around the lack of cooperation between CRS and the Library of Congress's Inspector General. I had a quick conversation with her out in the hall. She said that may not be the case in her opinion, but you're on the Oversight Committee. We on House Administration are not exercising our proper oversight responsibility over CRS and over the Library of Congress in this case. I would love to work with your committee, your teams, to be able to get some of these questions answered. So take that back to my colleagues on oversight, because I think it would be very beneficial for us to maybe utilize some of our oversight responsibilities to get some of these suggestions directly to CRS. So with that, I yield back, Derek, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. And I know you're here only in your capacity as someone who worked in CRS.
Thank
so
you, Chairman.
You got it. With that, anybody else have any questions that we didn't get to? I want to thank Mr. Perlmutter. I know that both he and Ms. Williams had 3 hearings at the same time, but the ability to join us virtually, I'm very grateful for that. I want to thank our witnesses for their testimony today and thank our committee members for their participation. Thank you to our staff for pulling together another terrific hearing with some very informative witnesses. So without objection, all members will have 5 legislative days within which to submit additional written questions for the witnesses to the chair, which will be forwarded to the witnesses for their response. I ask our witnesses to please respond as promptly as they are able. Without objection, all members will have 5 legislative days within which to submit extraneous materials to the chair for inclusion in the record. While I'm giving thanks, I should also give thanks, I think, to the Ed and Labor Committee who's hosting us, so thank you to them as well. And with that, this hearing is adjourned. Thanks, everybody.